We're going to be taking a deeper look at a central question around the impact of these kinds of encounters that we heard young people describe in the opening video and in the conversation that followed, and the impact that it has on their own sense of identity and attitude and beliefs. We're also going to talk about envisioning a new reality for youth police encounters, what that might look like as well, and understand a little bit more about how adolescents in particular are unique from both children and adults, and how the law enforcement system needs to encompass those kinds of questions. I'll introduce our panel in just a second after the video, but without further ado, let me step aside for the second introductory video for this second conversation, and go ahead and roll tape.
I only been stopped once by the police. This was like when I was coming home from school, because I guess it was kind of late. It was around 8, because I had stayed late that day in the library working on a project. And I was walking down the street, and then a police car pulled up, and they asked if they could ask me a couple of questions. And they were asking me questions like, what is my name, how old I am. Apparently there was a murder in the neighborhood, but I haven't heard about it. And then they would ask me like, do you know the boy, were you involved? And they would ask me questions like, who do you run with, and stuff like that. And then the police officer who had stopped me had blue smoke in my face, and they just drove off.
I have never had an encounter with the police, but everybody around me has. Yeah, my uncle around my grandma's house, where she lives now, she lives on 93rd and Evans. And literally right outside of the house, my uncle, he kind of tall, and he light skinned, and he got an afro. He don't have dread. Suspect, but they was riding past, and they stopped him. They made him take off all his stuff, threw his stuff all over the curb. They asked him, I think they asked him, where was he going? And he's literally right in front of the house. He was coming out his car, and they asked him, did he steal the car? They ran his license plate, didn't find nothing, and they basically kind of beat him up for no reason at all. And he's right in front of his house. And as he's telling them that that's his house, they didn't care. They put him in the back of the police car. The whole time we sitting in the house and we looking out the window the entire time. And they basically put him in the back of the car, ran him through, and then let him go.
I got stopped like with my friends or whatever, but we was kind of out like at 9, something like that. We was coming home from, playing the game, coming from my house playing the game. So we had got stopped by the police. They like, what you out here doing or whatever at this time of night? Off at the corner so they can go home. And then they had got in trouble, so they ran. Other friends, they ain't had nothing on their record neither. So they told us to stand on the car or whatever. And they had us out there for a minute. And, I had asked him like, why you got us out here? And he told me to shut up. And I had asked him again. Then he had slapped me or whatever. And, but I actually want to be a detective. So, I don't let that get to me.
I felt kind of disrespected, and like at the same time I felt like they were treating me as if I was already a criminal without even knowing me at all.
Well, it made me feel kind of like distant from the police, because like I said, he was just sitting in front of his car. He was literally coming from somewhere. He parked, he got out, and then he sat there. He had his door open, he was just sitting there. The police pulled up, pulled him out the car, started investigating or whatever. So-called investigating, and I'm just sitting there like, he didn't do nothing. We all waiting for him to come in the house. So.
Like, it felt like man, I'm a man, and another man just slapped me. I can't do nothing about it, It's just the law, I guess. So I felt I was embarrassed. I ain't wanna have no encounters with the police, like nothing. Like, I didn't even wanna look at them. And I just went home, told my mom, and she like, that's just the way people is. They got some issues going on or whatever. So it took me a while to get over it, but eventually I got over it.
It was a mix of surprise and anger, because I've like heard stories about how the police were like disrespectful and stuff like that, but I never really believed it, because I thought the police were supposed to protect you and like, you know, uphold order and stuff like that. And then like after I was stopped, it's just like maybe these stories are true. I have no idea what they could be capable of if they could like be that disrespectful and assume that I'm a criminal when I'm just one boy walking down the street. So I don't know how they would have responded if I was in a large group or had responded in a disrespectful way when he blew smoke in my face.
It just kind of made me feel like I don't trust him. To just see your uncle being thrown across.
Before the incident, I probably would have instantly went to the police for help, but like after the incident, I don't know if they'll come, if they're responsible. Will they like come at me for being involved in the incident? Because it's like, if they're the kind of people that are gonna assume who I am, they may assume that I started the altercation or something like that.
It distinctly changed at that moment. My uncle doesn't look like any type of criminal at all. Like,
My wrestling coach actually a police officer or whatever. You know, he was encouraging me to, you know, do criminal justice or go to the Navy or whatever. So it was like not all police is bad people, you know. And then you just gotta let stuff go. Like it's just like other people on the street. Like you got your good people, you got your bad people. So that's how it is.
Yeah, because like at first it was like I assumed that all cops were good cops, but now I realize that there are some bad cops, and when I call, what's gonna come, a good cop or a bad cop? Whether are they gonna be effective, do their job, ask questions, investigate, or criminalize and penalize me before even knowing me?
Actually start, if I can, with you, Herschela, by going back 2 years, perhaps almost to the day here, when you had a similar conference, the title of which was Living Like We're Bulletproof, Public Health Crisis of Youth Trauma and Violence. How do these kinds of encounters that we've been hearing about today contribute to that broader theme that you talked about here 2 years ago?
Well, I think they're directly connected. It's traumatic and it's violent. It's low-level violence, but it permeates an entire community. So, in my mind, is
Let's
it on?
go ahead and, it may not be,
Oh, I'm
let's switch
sorry.
it. Thank you.
Great.
Great.
That's better. Yeah, in my mind, it's all of a piece, okay? Because you've got 15-year-olds who are scared of the police. And I hate to break it to you. You got 50-year-olds who are scared of the police, okay? I don't want to get stopped by the police on Chicago's South Side. Hyde Park, I don't mind so much. 85th Street, it's dicier. That's my belief, and I don't think I'm paranoid. I don't think, anything except that's my reality.
Yeah. And Carla, you have a book that you're working on that will be coming out this fall. The title of that book is Unequal City, Race, Schools, and Perceptions of Injustice. And one of the things you focus on is the racially stratified social and physical terrain, as you describe it, that youth traverse between home and school. Two institutions here, school, but the criminal justice system. As you think about that terrain and what we've experienced and heard from youth today, what are the long-term impacts of the kind of experiences that we've just witnessed?
Well, these videos show that there are experiences that young people are having that are marking them. It's a developmental question. It's a developmental issue. This is a formative stage of their lives. Number one, they're figuring out who they are. So in terms of identity, how do you present yourself to the public? How does the public receive you? You heard the young girl say, I don't want to make them more adults than they've already been made by the police, but you heard her say, he didn't look like a criminal. So what does that mean in terms of how you wear your hair, how you wear your clothes, how you present? And we've heard of the other strategies. So This is a coming of age issue, and as of all other transitions, whether you're going into adulthood or starting a job or maybe starting a family or going to school, this is a true marker of what your life trajectory will look like. And if it starts on this phase being so negative and so traumatic, we have a problem. And I think that's part of the social terrain young people are navigating. But for my book, I also think about the physical terrain they have to navigate as they're going to school and they're making these calculations, as we've heard. The young people I talk to, they figure out which streets they're gonna go in, as they said, how many people they may walk with, what is protective. So they're being adaptive to this world, and no one else is thinking of this as normal, but it is their normal. So I can say my book definitely corroborates all that you've heard here from studying young people who attend Chicago Public Schools, 9th and 10th graders. They're at the start of this adultification, having these very adult-like experiences at an age where they're still young. They should still be children. They should be teenagers, willing and able to try out any number of identities, any number of things that they should do, but they're very much constrained. And there are different ways that they adapt to these constraints.
I want to invite everybody here to feel free to jump in, but Margaret, this is a perfect pivot to you and your research that really looks at youth human development, looks at the adolescent mind. What are the impacts there?
This is a very...
Make sure your microphone's on too. In fact, I'll ask all the panelists just to check your box there.
I didn't get one.
You didn't get one?
No.
Can we get JT a
Stop
microphone?
right here.
I could just hold a big mic.
Okay.
I want to continue with that point, which is so important. And that is, as a developmental psychologist and a person who's focused on these issues for a long time and applied them in real time, what I can say, especially given the previous panel, that has basically been noted by you as well, is that, development occurs in context, in everyday context. And for me, that introduces a really basic concern, and that is, number one, the problem of adultification, and two, the other issue of dehumanization. And for the young Tashiano in the last panel, when she made the comment that it feels like being black at the wrong time, that almost made me cry. I was so moved by it. For a young person to have to go there, to think about who she is. And what I want to say about that, so you have to allow me a couple of minutes because it is a nuanced story, a complex human development story under irregular conditions that have been socially constructed. It means then that our children have to think about in nuanced ways, about very basic everyday issues, navigating space. And adolescents in particular, getting from home to school, dealing with peer groups, et cetera, in an environment when their very humanity is not recognized. As she said, being black at the wrong time. That means before I open my mouth and share how smart, how thoughtful, et cetera, that I am, she's viewed first as a person of color and a society at a time when we want to de-emphasize, not acknowledge, the fact that race continues to matter. So we have adolescents who are charged with the same tasks as adolescents in the suburbs and other more privileged communities, and that is to prepare oneself for adulthood by learning how to work, and you do that by having work opportunities, and being able to make mistakes without consequences, and you learn from that feedback, being able to navigate space under safe conditions, and coping with all of that in very nuanced ways. But they don't have the opportunity to use those sort of nuanced ways of thinking when they get to school. So we have people, yes, who are making careers tallying other people's misery, and that's not good enough. So we have, basic funding going to people who, again, enumerate how bad things are. So that's the what, for me, of the calculus. But we don't want to stop and understand the more nuanced issue of the how and the why of it, and how all of us are a part of that. And yes, you're absolutely right, sir. This is an economic issue. That failure for some guarantees success for others. And we don't acknowledge that, but yet our young people understand that. So when you think about the data, we have the data. And the data suggests that even with all these challenges, that our children are able to show a great deal of resiliency. That in the face of all these challenges, they're still able to do well psychologically. Let's face it, the suicide statistics are very different for white children, adolescents, and for black children. Somehow they're managing to show resiliency, but the issue is the cost. So therefore, in schools, when you think about the psychic energy that it takes to maintain self-esteem, to maintain psychological well-being, to navigate space in under-resourced, under-supported conditions, using all that psychic energy for those tasks, well, how in the heck is there anything left to maximize out the standardized tests that become a part of everyday lives in school for our children? So that's all I'm saying is that there is a mismatch between the normal human development contextual experiences of kids of color and other kids, but yet they're all being compared on the same rubric. So they're all being compared in terms of achievement outcomes, but no one's asking the question of the everyday experiences. Let me give you one example of how that can change. Because basically everyone's being trained, teachers, social workers, police officers, to not recognize that their training and their learning is simply a part of this dehumanization, if you will, set of beliefs about people of color. So you can grow and develop and show resiliency in your professional role. So for example, one of the professional activities I take part in, because I apply the science in communities, is I attend and I'm a part of groups, and one is the attending meetings and giving talks at International Association of Chiefs of Police, so you get a sense of what's happening around the country and how some police chiefs get it. And they understand to get it means then that their staff members are more competent and do a better job. Therefore, resources are spent more smartly if they understand the challenges that they need to overcome. So in one district on the West Coast, there's a police chief who understands that there needs to be a new way of thinking about youth, relationally speaking, right? And he can only do that by getting up close. And so what he does is to give his police officers a couple of hours a week paid. And what they do is to mentor neighborhood youngsters. So what he finds is that in the afternoons, if you go to precincts in his police district, you find young people hanging around in precincts. They're not hanging around because they've been, taken off the street, but they're there to see their mentors. They're there to get help with their homework, et cetera. And you know what? It means that when you see this child of color on a dark corner, you're going to think first before you pull the trigger, because suddenly they're humans, okay? And they're not just, people of color who've been dehumanized and also disrespected. And it makes a difference for relationships. So therefore, youngsters understand that how they cope might be difficult for police officers. So there's a reciprocal benefit. We can change.
Well, let's stay with that idea of change for a second. JT, I want to come to you, and everyone else, I want to get your thoughts, and everyone here with us. Let's envision a different kind of encounter than what we've heard expressed in the videos and today. What would that look like?
A different type of encounter between the perspective of a police officer to the person?
Absolutely, yeah, to a young person in police, from your perspective.
Okay, from my perspective, a good police interaction would be basically the police officer would interact with the child, juvenile, or person as if they were a human being. The initial reaction that I have when I see a police officer is not to interact with him. It feels like it's going to be conflict instead of an interaction. Interactions happen. Interactions can sometimes be good, but conflicts are always bad. You can't have a good conflict. A conflict can either go wrong or right with the police officer. But back to your question, a good interaction would be a mentor police officer coming up to a young black male that he sees on the corner waiting for a bus, just to see if you want to see what he's doing, if you want to see why he's standing there, talk to them. It's that simple. It's not a where you're going, what you're doing. It's what's going on with you, you know? How was your day today? You know? Anything crazy happen? I talk to my kids on a daily basis about this. When they come into my shop and they interact with me, I'm the mentor. So the first thing they do is interact with me. And the first thing I ask them is, how was your day? How was school? Anything crazy happen? And they're flat out, the first thing they're saying is telling me every single thing that happened at school, everything that happened to them to the time they woke up to the time they saw me. And then it's a different type of relationship. Before that, I was on a different type of relationship with the children at the shop. It was strictly, I was just a production mechanic, and the kids, and I got hired from the kids, so me being a production mechanic, I pretty much just did bicycle works and didn't interact with them, and they were a nuisance, and I didn't like them. And once I became the mentor, I actually saw that they might be a nuisance, but these are the future generations. They're the next ones that's gonna have to take the reins of this earth and do things better than we did, and without that mentorship, and without that police officer stepping up and being that mentor, these things will never happen because it's just going to keep coming back full fold. Yeah. So that's a good interaction.
I find it interesting that you, with the changing your title, sort of changed your orientation to them. And the conversation earlier, a few of the students said, you know, the officer has a badge, a figure of authority, as Forrest said, this is a representative of the state. And how might we think of that position as a way of being more on the nurturing arm? Loic Vaquan's the sociologist who talks about the meshing of the punishing arm of the state to the nurturing arm. What would be the nurturing arm? Would it be our public schools? Would it be public health provision? Would it be the juvenile justice system? And I'm studying that now in New York, and you see more punishment sometimes than nurturing. But to think about having these positions and then having a different orientation to who you encounter. And so for me, it's important we think of the people who are the brokers in taking kids on a trajectory towards success, or perhaps a different direction. Police officers are brokers, social workers are brokers, teachers are brokers, mentors are brokers, parents, professional parents especially, are brokers. And so how do each of these people either accumulate advantages in the investments they're making into the young people, or does it represent a cumulative disadvantage if they're negative encounters? And so it's really interesting to think about how we could think of these interactions and shift them in a different way.
I would just to chime in. I mean, we should get comments from you all because we're agreeing too much.
I want to make sure your microphone is on, Emily. Can you just double check that?
It's on.
Okay, all right.
Still can't hear me. It's just not going the right. How about this? Is this better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Hold my lavalier mic. Okay. What I just wanted to add to, I mean, I think this, I very much share this idea. I do think there's a role for the juvenile justice system to the extent that's where young people are. A lot of young people shouldn't be there, right, but wherever they are. And I think that gets to the point of the shift. Your shift was just realizing that in your role as the expert bike mechanic, you could also play an extremely important role as one of the many people who is engaged in the upbringing of young people. And I want to push a little back on the sort of the worry about adultification in one way, so a little bit of disagreement, which is just that a very important aspect of adolescence is that it is transitional. And one of the most important things that I don't think is inconsistent with what anybody has said is we have to take young people very seriously, and in all those engagements, treat them seriously as the adults they're becoming. And I think sometimes the risk of focusing, and I don't think this is a risk for the way people here who are really thinking about this issue focus, but sometimes the rhetoric is kind of, it's either these are children, these are kids, or, you know, right, these are criminals, these are adults. Well, there's this really important developmental stage where the young people very much see themselves as the adults they're becoming. And if we think about being a parent of a teen, I can say the special challenge, I mean, professional parent is really a great, I like the term because it shouldn't apply just to parents, it should apply to everybody in every walk of life that's engaging these young people. How are we actually helping with that upbringing in the roles that we play? And I think from the first panel, Professor Stewart, is that, did I get your name right? Yes? Made the point that we're always teaching, we're always training. But the other piece that I want to pick up on that I think is very much tied with what you said is we're always in relationships. They're either good or bad. And young people are not just learning how to behave and how to see themselves, but with whom are they, who cares about me? Where am I connected? And every engagement with the police that is a negative interaction is a message that my relationship with you is in conflict. My relationship to the community of law enforcement is as outsider, as alien, as in opposition to. You see me this way, and as I learn who I am as I grow up, I begin to see myself that way. Right, so the real interest is in every police encounter, how is the message? We are one community of lawmakers and law enforcers, and we are living in this community together, and I am helping you as you grow up to understand, as someone I take very seriously, to understand what it means to be a citizen in that society.
Margaret,
Yeah, I got a few.
Yeah, go ahead. Actually, go ahead, Herschel, and then I'll go to Margaret.
I was just going to disagree a little bit.
Yeah, me too.
Just a little bit. I really think we've got to be very careful, and that this adultification is critical, because it's the first step to somehow making children of color forfeit childhood.
Thank you. Precisely.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that, but
That's
I
the
think...
point.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me just finish my point. And yes, I still have scars from raising a teenage son, so I feel your pain. But the fact of the matter is, as they are becoming adults, and we must take them seriously, but we must also not take them seriously. They're knuckleheads. I'm sorry. That's a special scientific term. You know, they think they're grown, and what we must remember at the street corner, at the police station, or wherever else we are the adults in the room. This is not a balanced test. It's not. It is not the youth and the police. That is a ridiculous dichotomy for me. Where are all the other adults who are supposed to be responsible? Youth and police can never be balanced. And to say that they share an equal weight in this, no, they don't. It is about the mentoring. It is about looking at the kid and saying, you're a pain in the neck, you're a nuisance, but you're a 15-year-old nuisance, and with my help, when you get to be 25, you're gonna be sitting on a panel talking about helping some other little knucklehead.
That's right.
That's what community is about in building. So, and we so often give up earlier on children of color, but black and brown boys, the problem is that what we've seen, they fit the description.
Yeah.
For people to say, my relatives don't look like criminals, says we all agree what a criminal looks like. And that's about a black boy between the ages of 15 and 19 with some weird hairstyle and some baggy pants. Yeah. And so we all have to change lots of things, and I would congratulate everyone on the panel for saying, her hair is not felonious. My hair is not felonious. Her hair has not committed a crime. We're gonna work on that. But, you know what I'm saying? But it's not criminal. It's not. So what are you looking at when you're looking at a 15-year-old boy?
Well,
that's my only pushback.
Go ahead, yeah.
Since I
Emily?
got pushback, and I think others agreed with the pushback, I want to push back and push back a little bit. First of all, I very much agree with that, everything you said. But I think there are different categories here, right? One is about level of respect. And I actually think all young people, as in their adolescence, as they grow toward adulthood, need to get a message, a very strong message, that even though they're knuckleheads maybe, it really matters what they think, it matters what they're becoming, and that is about a message of not just you're still a kid, but you're becoming something else that I think is very important. And I actually think we also shortchange our black and brown youth on that dimension. And so, I mean, I would say this is this kind of idea of taking seriously and respecting, and in that sense, looking toward the adults everybody's becoming is something that I think is also shortchanged. But the other thing I was going to say is very quickly, I taught a high school course on juvenile justice at the law school. It was a high school course that brought together two groups of young people who came from very different backgrounds and very different schools, both associated with the University of Chicago.
And you did this very recently.
I just did it in the
yeah.
winter. It's sort of a little bit still ongoing, little bits of it left, but the course is over. And one of those groups of kids were from the laboratory schools. Laboratory schools, it's a lot of quite affluent young people at that school, and a lot of faculty kids go to the school. It's a kind of, it's been around forever. It's kind of a long recognized institution. And the other was the Woodlawn Charter School, which is a very new school, and a school that is at 64th and University. It's a local school and has shown real success and commitment to providing a very high quality education on the limited means that are available in the public charter system. And I wanted, among other things, for young people to be talking to each other, not just having adults with opinions about things, but let's talk about these issues, and I want you to be talking to each other as well, and I want to learn from that. And I learned a lot from that. But one of the things that I think ties to the point that you and I were going back and forth a little bit about is that there was a discussion that sort of erupted at the end of one of the classes between the two groups of students describing what happened when there had been an incident involving drugs in the two schools. They each had incidents involving drugs in the schools where, someone was caught with drugs in the school. And clearly the reaction at the laboratory schools had been to protect the kids, right? They were knuckleheads. They needed to have this not ruin their lives, that what really mattered is they have a chance to go on and go to college and grow up and get some sense. And the reaction of the Woodlawn kids is, was sort of floored by that, sort of thinking, well, that's a violation of the law. How is it okay to protect these kids, right? So it was very interesting to see that in the context of the Woodlawn experience, there was a real value placed on that law and order that was not, I think, recognizing the risks they were sort of, that minds were sort of putting their community at in that context, right? So I think that goes to what you're saying.
Yes.
The willingness to protect young people from their mistakes and the importance of doing that, right? So that's a way it makes sense to treat young people as kids.
Yeah. Margaret?
Okay, can I make a quick comment real quick?
You certainly can.
She told me get on the mic when I wanted to say something, so. I was standing here for a minute, so my comment is kind of old. I want to go back on the good police interaction. I seen it one time in St. Louis with an old white man. So this guy was actually crazy, like he was yelling and cursing at the police, and the police had him handcuffed. They cut my mic down, y'all know I don't need it. They had him handcuffed to himself, and the guy was like, the police had a hat on. He taking the police hat off with his head. And guess what? The police did their job. Their job is to be orderly. Their job is to get criminals, so they're trained on how to run and catch you. They trained on how to deal with people that is acting unlawful. So it's not unnatural for them to find somebody that's not cooperating. So what they did was, two officers held them, they stayed calm, and they telling him, like, sir, you gotta calm down. Sir, you gotta calm down. And I was so amazed. I was like, so y'all do know how to be police officers. Like, y'all do know how to do this. Like, I thought they was gonna flip this man, knock him down. The guy was like, literally like, let me bump into you. Like, just bumping the police officers and everything. And I couldn't believe it. But they stood their ground. They stay with their uniform. See, the uniform is you take yourself outside your person. Of course, a regular person will get mad, but your uniform is you're supposed to go by these bylaws. If somebody run, chase them. If they out of order, you know how to hold them a certain way. You know how to pin them down. You know how to tie them up. That's the good police interactions when you give the appropriate response to what's given to you. So if I'm standing on the bus stop, the appropriate response is not to ask me why I'm standing there, because why else would I be standing at a bus stop? And that's not even that. That's not your right as a police officer to even ask me that. Even if I was walking through a white neighborhood, you do not have by law, because that's just stereotype and suspicion. You don't have the law to question me. You just could get away with it, so you do it. My other thing was, I appreciate everybody talking about how we need to have conversations with the police and things like that. And the thing is, of course, every police officer is not bad. So if you sit me in a room with this man or this woman and we have an hour conversation, of course we're gonna link up. But if they get a call on that radio and say, do a sweep of that girl's neighborhood, you're gonna have to still do a sweep of my neighborhood regardless of how good our interaction was. So like the man was saying earlier, there was a former gang member and police officer. I don't know how he pulled that off, but he wanted to do it because you can't have no record. So, I ain't finna go there though.
That's a great, you want to close with a quick point of question?
Yeah, that's what I'm closing right now. So we can't have conversations unless the conversation is, how can we change your job description? Because it's the job description that criminalizes us. It's the job description that have them doing all that systematic oppression, and it's also the people themselves. But having conversations with police officers is not going to change what the laws that they have to enforce. And if the laws is messed up, their job description is still messed up.
So, Carla, would you mind just addressing that? Anybody else who wants to jump in? And before you do, I just want to say that there's a microphone down here between next to this camera. Do we take the microphone? Okay. We have a roving microphone here, and so feel free to raise your hands, and we'll begin moving this conversation out. We've got a hand back up there. But yeah, on the point that she made, a couple points that she made around job description, and in some respects around, in an adult-adolescent or adult-child relationship, act like the adult in that relationship. Right?
I think one true test, if you were to look at all Chicago public high schools, each of them has at least 2 police officers embedded in them. And you could see the different ways that young people interact with, approach, avoid the police officers in these schools. So this is almost an experiment. You can look across the different types of schools, if they're selective, magnet schools, neighborhood schools in particular areas, and that's what I did in my research. And for many young people, as I'm walking down the hall, like, okay, parental consent to do the interview with me, they're excited to sort of show like, oh, people care about what I think, people, really want to hear what I say, and I'm like, yes, this is an important moment. So they're like, yeah, I hate the police, I hate this, but as we're, walking back, and I'm walking them out of back to the homeroom, it's like, hey, what's up, Officer Flores? Let me borrow $1. Officer Smith, and I'm just like, I thought you hated the police. We have to talk some more. So they really can have an individual relationship in a positive way, and it's like within the structure of this institution. But it can also be seen as an occupying force in the same type of institution. So for one school, on the outside it says, Chicago Public Schools, children first. And then the next sign says, first you must be searched. So they're weighing these contradictions each and every day. So I think the interaction can start from where we already have the kind of presence of police. You said the program brings them into the precinct, but I think that's a bit problematic too, because who's coming into the precinct? Is there a great distribution of young people, all races, classes doing this work, or is it just falling on the burden of young people from particular neighborhoods who look a certain way? But if we look across any of these institutions like schools where you have this equal presence and very different behaviors and interactions, that's where you think, okay, we can change not only the policies, but the behaviors as well as the results.
But Carla, what you seem to be saying is that there may be all sorts of good things happening at an individual level, but you have to change the institution. You've been studying 2 institutions, so how do you structurally change the institution?
So I think what Tracy said on the other panel, you start from the ground up, not just from the top down. You see that there is incorporation of everyone's experiences embedded into the actual policies and the practices, not just the policies, but the practices, because what the commenter said out there, we know the law, but do people actually enforce the law in a way that is consistent, in a way that people can believe is legitimate? So I think we really do have to make sure that the legal practices and the actual laws actually, mesh. Yeah. And that's been a problem.
JT, did you want to chime in?
I wanted to piggyback on what you were talking about the Chicago Police Department actually in the school. I went to Hyde Park Career Academy when I was younger. But and there are 2 police officers there, and I've actually had good encounters with these police officers. I had a bad encounter with them when I first met them, just because they were police officers, and then once the relationship buzzled, it became something better than that. I was actually stopped by one of these police officers on my return trip back to Chicago when I was in the Marine Corps. And that officer knew me flat off the back. He knew my face, and I did do a traffic violation. He handled himself as an officer to write me my ticket and to get my information like he was supposed to, but it was done in a different type of way. It wasn't done in a controversial way where this guy's coming at me, banging on the window with a nightstick, telling me for my license and registration. No, he instantly saw who I was. Oh man, I remember you from when you was a little knucklehead kid running around here with all of the girls, you know, all this other crazy stuff. And it went from that to him saying, but I have to give you this ticket because you did have a traffic violation. And he handled himself like police officers should handle themselves. So I have to disagree with what she was saying about the conversation and the relationship that doesn't matter, because at that point I've had multiple incidents with police officers throughout my life, and that was probably one of the best outcomes that could come from that, because of that personal relationship that I have with that police officer. It wasn't a deep personal relationship, as if this guy knew my first name and last name. He just knew me by face and knew what type of kid I was, and knew that I wasn't one of the kids that were gang banging or doing anything. And he saw that and treated me with that same respect that he would another adult.
Really quickly, Herschel, before I go back.
Yeah, I gotta throw a monkey wrench in here. Okay, for those of you that don't know, I represent kids accused of crime, from misdemeanors all the way up to first-degree murder. So let me say this, the conversation will be incomplete unless we talk about how police treat kids accused of crime and kids who are rightly so, who did exactly what the police said they did. Because as long as we are going to carve out an exception, that exception tends to swallow up everything else and leads to sort of excuses that in the split moment, how do I know whether this kid's a murderer or whether he's a good kid? How am I supposed to be able to figure that out at 12 o'clock at night? Well, treat them both the same. Get the one to the station, let the other one go home, and we might also, that would be a better intervention. Most kids who commit crimes, again, are still going to be back out here. They will still need the socialization, they will still need protection, they will need to be taught how to be adults. But we cannot carve out this, you know, everybody's a gangbanger, but my friends.
Yeah.
No.
Tease this out just a little bit, though, because some people may have heard what you said, and the question in their mind may be, wait, are you saying equate, and then how do you equate the treatment of, say, someone like Jamel with someone who just, you know, committed a homicide?
Shot somebody?
Right? So what do you tell us what that looks like?
What I'm saying is what we're doing now is we're equating Jamel as if he just shot somebody.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, if you can't figure out the difference, then flip it. Treat the killer like he didn't. And then we'll know what to do with him once we get him to the police station. It should be more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
There would be that.
But it seems to be the other way around.
But how it's teased, I mean, how you tease it out again is that
Hold on a second. Yeah.
everyone on that street corner may or may not be involved. Everyone in that child's home may not be a collaborator. The fact that you want to take my child down to the police station does not translate into telling me to sit my black ass down. That's what I'm talking about. That's the difference. Mom, your kid's going to the station. You may, not only may, you should come with him.
Yes.
Not all the, you know, he'll be here, he'll be there, 5 hours later, he's somewhere else. So I'm saying that we respect lots of people who commit crimes. Trust me, Bernie Madoff did not feel disrespected.
And
I'm sorry.
Back to the example that Emily was citing with the
Exactly,
Yeah.
and it's the same conduct.
Good.
And, you know, at the charter school in Woodlawn, not only is it criminal, it's felonious if they choose to make it so.
Yeah. Great points. We have a
Does in negative encounters with the police cause a form of mental illness, anxiety, and depression? And should we begin looking at that? It may not happen right away, but years later, where people who've had negative encounters with the police become very anxious, very depressed, very angry about what happened.
I'm sorry, the beginning part of that, I didn't quite hear you. Could you, yeah.
Does a negative encounter with the police cause a form of mental illness,
Okay.
anxiety and depression later on in life, maybe immediately? You're sort of changing your lifestyle after you've run into a negative encounter with police. You're doing something different, not to encounter them. And is this something that we should really begin also addressing too?
I think that's a really good question, and how I would answer you would be to say, number one, sometimes we talk about the Black community as if everyone is the same, and there is a lot of variability within the community. And what I would say to you, number one, is that all humans are vulnerable, even though they'd like to equate vulnerability with risk. It is not the same. All humans are vulnerable. We have both risk factors and challenges, but we also have protective factors. And even within the same family, given just basic differences in temperament, that people respond differently to threat, to traumatic experiences. And in terms of, you were asking about the mental health impact, there are differences also in terms of how you perceive and experience supports. So you can have two fellows in the same family, and one may end up, here at U of C in the law school, and one might end up on death row someplace. But yet theoretically, they have the same parents. They grew up under the same socialization experiences. They may have had the same adverse, traumatic, potentially, experiences with police officers. But their difference is how they respond. So the whole family's involved, because to the extent that families have enough support themselves, like, jobs with good health care and good, family support, et cetera, they can basically understand if something happens to two brothers or together, right? Because I've done this, I have a study like this, I call it the brothers study. And these two brothers are on different developmental trajectories. But yet they were raised in the same family. So we interviewed the brothers, then we interviewed the parents to hear what messages the parents actually gave the fellas as they were growing up. And then we asked the brothers what each actually heard. They hear very different things. And so you have to have, in essence, enough support so parents can also provide the supports that are necessary, serve that wedge role with other socializing places like the school, because this baseline, there are differences in how one responds to chronic traumatic situations. One may be able to infer a lot of support, and they can sort of walk through this high risk environment and high traumatic conditions, and you get different outcomes. Another one may look like the young lady talked about her uncle, who looked like he shouldn't have any problems, but he might still have problems, because I would say there's also a downside of privilege. You can have a lot of supports, a lot of privileges, such that you don't learn how to cope. So when something huge and traumatic happens to you, your adverse reaction is much more significant than someone else's, because you've not had a history of learning how to cope and practicing coping. So what I'm saying to you in response is that one can't give just an answer to something like that. There are lots of individual differences, even within the same family, and the same gender brothers. You make meaning in different ways. And that's the thing about for me, the sort of the contradiction here in terms of our expectations in schools. You use your intellectual prowess to perform well on all these tests. Well, you use the same intellectual prowess to make sense of your social world. And that includes the expertise or lack thereof, relationally speaking, of people like police officers, people like parents even, that you infer may like one brother the better, and therefore that brother may infer things differently, and just it's unnaturally experience trauma a little bit differently. So what I would say is that we talk about communities as if they're all the same in terms of members, and too often that's how police officers respond to young people. But in fact, there are significant differences in our jobs because of our status, i.e. police officers, teachers, or whatever. Our job is to be experienced as supportive, because all support is not experienced as supportive. So the training matters in terms of relationally how we treat young people, because even in schools, you're not, and in police officers, you're not going to embrace someone that you're fundamentally fearful of. So in the previous session, the gentleman was trying to make the point about a philosophy, an undergirding philosophy of fearing all dark bodies is a real issue. Because when you have an encounter as a police officer or a teacher trying to do your job, and you suddenly view that early maturing 14-year-old boy not as a fella in school trying to take advantage of a learning opportunity, or an adolescent trying to navigate a community to have his or her needs met, you're viewed instead as a dangerous man. And that means then it's a very different reaction and very different coping experience, and has implications for the individual in ways that may well be different from one's own brother.
I know
Much more complex.
Can I ask you to hold and get you on the next go around here? Because I want to get to more questions. We've got one here. And 3 back there. All right, we'll do 1 back there, down here, then we'll go back up there. All right, yes.
Hi, I just had a question
We'll ask you to
about
stand too, if you don't mind.
okay. I know there are a couple people, at least on this panel, who are child welfare scholars, and I'm just thinking, today we've talked a lot about how street interactions between police and youth in the street and in schools evolve or happen, but I'm thinking about how child welfare kind of goes into families' homes and polices people's parenting, and I don't often hear that as part of the conversation about how youth get involved in juvenile justice and then in the prison system. But I was just wondering if any of you have thoughts on that, and about maybe the silence around child welfare and its role in this problem.
Who would like to take that here?
That's a whole nother conference.
Emily, do you want to jump in, Herschel?
Well, you look like you're geared up. I don't want to get in the way of that.
Well, no, I don't think that we're not talking about the child welfare system, and policing the child welfare system is it's an interesting way to put it, because we don't sort of police the child welfare system. If you're talking about how do children get into the juvenile justice system and the adult criminal justice system, again, it's any number of ways they get in there. I think that sometimes but it is a sort of group failing. It's been my experience over the last 20 years that the home may in fact have debilitating factors, but the school doesn't compensate. That somewhere, because the resiliencies come, I think, from finding some place where one can compensate.
Right.
And my clients who have committed crimes and who are the most sort of traumatized and or fractured are the ones that there was not a support system. There was not, my mother didn't come home, but Auntie Emily filled in, or I could go to school, or I could even go to the police station or whatever. So, I mean, the feeders to the juvenile justice system and prison primarily are poverty, neglect, lack of education, and then that other sort of who knows what that says somehow this particular young adult absolutely feels isolated, abandoned, and has no, I think what Carla might call a positive trajectory in mind. And then it's just a matter of being out in the street late at night. Something's bound to happen.
Well, I do disagree a little. How about that? But just to say that I actually think it's a real insight, and it sort of expands our conversation to talk about what we mean by policing. And I see more of a parallel. I mean, I think the intervention of the child welfare system in the lives sometimes it's essential and it's life-saving, but the orientation of the child welfare system is not unlike the kind of descriptions we've heard in terms of the orientation on the streets between the young people and the police. I think it's a similar parallel story of starting with distrust and looking for the equivalent of the crime, looking for the failing parent, rather than a system that looks at relationships and how to help. So
We agree again. No,
okay. So just
I don't disagree with that.
We have a question here. I'll have you go ahead and stand up and make sure that microphone's on.
Well, like, I was trying to go back what you said earlier. You said if you hang out in the corner, like, something like that. Well, I hang with a lot of dudes, but I'm not in the game or nothing, but all my friends, like, say they're in the game. But I hang out with them a lot. But it's more like, when I hang with them, we just hanging for fun. But the police always pull up and trying to mess with us. And then they usually come after me first for some reason. But I know
You fit the description. Ain't you been paying attention? Okay, go ahead.
But then, like, one day, me and my brother was, like, running home. And then the police just stopped us. And the first thing he said was, that y'all just get robbing somebody. And he said it like it was it was really funny, like you actually thought. And I was like, really, this guy really thought I robbed somebody. He's checking my pockets. But it wasn't really hitting me because I wanted to get home before I get in trouble by my mom's. I'm more scared of my mom than what the police gonna find in my pocket pretty much. That's just me, like, but first thing that came to my mind when the police did a U-turn was, I told my brother, like, we should just run and get home because they won't find nothing. But then, like, I always get run into the police, like, all the time. Like, when I'm outside, I always get run in by myself or my sister or something. But when I'm by myself walking home at night, I want the police to be around. But at the same time, I don't. And it just feel like when the police are around, I'm by myself at night, I just feel like 5% safer. But it's really at 0, but I feel like 5% safer. But at the same time, I feel like they're just going to mess with me even more than if I'm by myself. I'm an easy target since I won't really do nothing. And then you talk about we grow up too fast. Like, for me personally, I have to grow up fast because my family situation. Then it's the name of like police don't show me no respect. I don't feel like I don't have to show no respect because I think since I had to grow up so fast and since I'm still young, I feel like I should get respect no matter what. And I don't care how old you are. Like, if you don't respect me, well, my sense of respecting you, and that's how I think. You might not think that way, but just how I think.
No, let me be perfectly clear. I mean, the one thing that I certainly agreed with Professor Buss was about, I think that every human being deserves respect. And I think that every young person out here deserves respect. But I think that as a parent and as an adult, the genuine respect I show you is by telling you that you need to think about this, that you and I are not equals yet. I will respect you, but I owe it to you to let you know, no matter how fast you grew up, you gotta grow up some more. And that's why adults are here to guide you along that path. I don't think I respect teenagers by telling them, you and me, we're gonna sit around and kick it like we're equals, because it ain't gonna happen. And you wouldn't be running home more scared of your mama than the police if you didn't know that somewhere.
I want to be sensitive to time. We're coming close to 5:30. I want to get to as many folks as possible. So I'll attempt to do that. I would just ask in return that for those who are remaining, make your question or comment as succinct as possible so we can try and get more voices in here. Yes?
I would like to say that, you got talked about good interaction and bad interaction, but at the same time, the whole time I was sitting here, I was thinking about how many students are in there, how many kids are in here, and how many less adults and police officers are actually sitting in these empty chairs right now. They don't seem to care to be here to listen to you, to hear your end on how these children feel about being pulled over, stopped, and unlawfully searched illegally, truly, because some of them are underage. My brother was actually underage, and he was 13. He got pulled over just because he fit the description of someone who committed a crime of kidnapping. He asked, my brother has a smart mouth. He was like, what do I have the kid in my pocket? And they were about to take him to jail. He was outside of my house, and it's just the silly things that cops do is it develops a sense of non-respect for an adult because they are an adult figure, because they choose to do unlawful things like that. If he's a 13-year-old kid and he's accused of kidnapping, you see no other kids around him, and yet you think it's sensible that he's the one who committed the crime. People nowadays, they have to think, and it has to start with the ones that are ahead of the police departments that are showing these officers the way that they've learned how you go about getting through your day and how you go about how you confront these kids nowadays. Like you have to be strong, and you have to see yourself as an alpha towards these kids so they can respect you. I take a law class with a post detective. Like, he used to be a detective, and he tells us, like, he watched other detectives use the ruthless way and aggression and the strategy of fear, and he said that never worked. Being a good police officer and talking to them and getting them to feel comfortable around you will get things done. He said those who use force and use like their power against them never, ever got a case done. He was like, they rarely did, and when they did, it was like unlawfully, and they always had problems. And you know, you guys have taken your time out to explain, and like, I find it very disrespectful that there's no Chicago police officers that are taking their time out to listen to you to fix the problem also.
Good point. Tomorrow I know the conversation will flip in the morning to get a perspective from police and law enforcement about how they view these same interactions, which I think will be really instructive and worthwhile for a deeper understanding. So let's take two more questions here. We got one here, and then,
Just one quick comment. I am still hung up with whether the problem really is between the way police are trained and the whole idea of policing a community and racism. How much is racism and how much is it the way the police are? I'm constantly making comparisons to the way police behave in our neighborhoods and behave in other neighborhoods. Police, when they approach a person, should treat them like they're somebody in their family. And I think if they kind of come from that, if they have enough within themselves that they can identify with the person, I guess it's their humanity, that they can treat them like they were somebody. How would you like to be treated if you were being approached? We all know that adolescence, as a parent I can say this, adolescence is a form of mental illness. Okay?
No.
And
no.
No.
I got two things. I want to let Margaret.
But what I'm saying is that in racism,
I don't want to lose that point.
You always see black children as being a little older than they are. You never see them as being children. When was the last time you seen the media portray an angel as a black child? They're always little white cherubs. So we have to let our children have their childhood, and the police have to do unto others as they would like done unto them.
A couple things I want to tease out here.
Might I say one thing?
Yes, on the adolescence piece.
Ms. Key, thank you so much for that comment, but I can't let people leave like this to, infer that, adolescents, represent a form of mental illness. I just want to say two things. There are 2 points in the life course where maturation is off the chart, where, in essence, biologically determined maturation is off the chart. And those are also the 2 points in the life course where we demonize the individuals at that point. One is adolescence, and the other is the terrible twos.
Yep.
So the point here is that it's not that they are showing a form of mental illness, they're showing all the attributes that we want them to show academically, for example, because, how they are, their health, etc., determines, in essence, what they say and their ability to analyze. So they're fine, but we have to respect where they are as well. I know, but I take it seriously because I love adolescents.
I want to go to the other point, though, here, because I think, there's a very, very central question here. We can do a lot of training. There can be great relationships, individual to individual. But if we are living in a culture and a society with media images that demonize, in particular, young black males, how do we escape that? I'm curious to know what your sense is. Does that just overwhelm everything in the end?
Yeah, I think the sort of guiding structure of policing is to look for the people who are deemed criminal. And so this sort of stereotype of who is criminal, what the criminal looks like, where does the criminal live, all of this guides the sort of policing decisions. And I'm hoping we'll hear more nuance about this tomorrow. I mean, there's a lot of social psychological research about how, they make decisions about who to shoot and when they see a weapon. And we're seeing this with Walter Scott, with Eric Harris, with these more recent really violent and fatal encounters. And there's a lot about the sort of mentality of police officers. But I think there is a guiding construct of the racialization and the criminalization of particular neighborhoods and particular types of people that we do have to deal with. And that is embedded within a larger policing culture. It's also embedded within us as communities and how we think about who the other is. So I think we have to not be so idealistic to say, oh, they will see us as equals, because there is a power relationship, there is a vulnerability, there is a selection to when police are called to particular places for a homicide or for a robbery or for this. This data, they don't get the kind of nice swath of variation. They're getting the worst of the worst in some ways, and this is what's forming their assessment of who people are. It's not random, it's not well distributed, and that's what they're working with.
Cheryl, let me give you a last point.
Let me just say this. I think at the end of the day, we get the police force that we deserve. And we don't import police from other countries. We don't import them from other planets. They're our brothers, our sisters, our husbands, our wives. If they're racist, guess what? They reflect us as much as they inform us. So yes, race, if we are not willing to talk about racism, sexism, poverty, and homophobia, we're not really going to be able to talk about anything realistically in this country.
Because we're on time, I know many people have other questions and comments. We have a reception coming up that I would invite everybody to participate in, and you can continue this conversation with our panelists. I want to leave with Jamal having the last word here. And tomorrow we're going to hear from police. I'm curious to know, what would you like to hear from law enforcement tomorrow, if you were to understand?
Well, the one thing I would like to hear from law enforcement is that the actual statistics of how many black males get stopped compared to in this typical area, because honestly I don't know. You have the UCPD and then you have the CPD, but the UCPD doesn't disclose that type of information. But it'll be nice to know the statistics so we can actually get to the root of these issues and say that this is a problem. And I want to hear how they're bettering the police department compared to how they're just reacting to all the media fire that's been happening towards them. It's not about what the media is saying. Everybody knows that it's a bunch of mumbo jumbo, but when it comes down to community members, I want to hear how they're interacting with the communities and how that is going to further the relationship between police and the community, not just the youth, but just the community in general.
Yeah.
Because it's a bit disconnect. They do come from our communities, but once they leave that community, it becomes a whole different ballgame. I had the same culture shock when I went to the Marine Corps. Going into the Marine Corps, you have normal people like me coming out of high school and they go into the Marine Corps, and then it's a huge culture shock when you go to another country and people treat you like you're the devil. And then when I came back to Chicago, I had the same exact culture shock, because it's like the people that I was protecting all those years seemed not to be doing the things that I'm trying to uphold in another country. The thing is, the police, I want to hear how they're bettering the police department instead of how they're just reacting to the media fire. I don't care about the media fire. All I care about is the community, the people in the community. You're more likely to get shot on the south side of Chicago than the north side of Chicago. I know that. I've lived that. I've been from one end to the other on a bicycle with my kids. They know. They know you're more likely to get shot down here than up there. If the more south you go in Chicago, the worse the police department gets. And that's by design, because the reality is there are bad people in our communities. People, we can keep saying that they're not, but they are. And the police, they do respond to those bad people. And they're necessary to respond to those bad people. But the thing is, good people have to get behind the police, and the police have to get with the good people. Because if they don't, the bad people are going to win, corporations are going to get bigger, everybody's going to get funded, but the good people of the community. If the community is not funded and supported by the police department and the people in the community, then then what are we really here talking about?
Well, JT, we'll have an opportunity to hear from the perspective of police tomorrow. That panel begins at 9 a.m. back here. The reception I mentioned is just down the hallway now. We encourage you to continue the conversation with each other and with our panelists. But in the meantime, please join me in thanking Jamel Triggs, Margaret Beal Spencer, Emily Boss, Herschella Conyers, and Carla Shedd. Thank you all so much for the conversation.